The arrow was still in her shoulder when Abel Turner first saw her. He had been hauling his net in from the shallows of Lake Garn, knee-deep in the cold gray water at the edge of the village dock, when the sound of boots on the wooden planking made him look up. The woman walking toward the dock head was tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with the clipped, deliberate stride of someone who was either ignoring a great deal of pain or simply too stubborn to acknowledge it. An arrow, black-shafted with gray fletching, jutted from her left shoulder at a shallow angle. The tip had punched through the leather and buried itself perhaps 2 fingers deep, and a dark stain had spread down the side of her form-fitting warrior's leathers. Deep brown, scarred and buffed to a matte finish, fitted close along her torso, and laced at the sides with dark cord, her arms bare from the shoulder down, and showing the pale green of orc skin pulled tight over muscle that had clearly been earned. A wide leather belt cinched everything at the waist, and tall boots rose to her knees above close-cut riding trousers that tucked into them. She wore no cloak. She carried a short recurve bow in her right hand, unstrung, and a long hunting knife at her hip. Her face was striking. High, broad cheekbones, small, dark eyes that were currently squinted in what he would later come to understand was her version of a scowl. A strong jaw, a wide mouth, and the paired lower tusks of an orc, not massive, not oversized, just present and white and precise, lifting the corner of her lip on each side in the way that gave orc expressions their particular gravity. Her hair was black and thick, pulled back in a severe braid, though several strands had come loose and stuck across her jaw and neck with sweat and dried lake spray. Abel straightened up in the water, net dripping in both fists, and watched her. He could not help it. She stopped at the dock's edge, looked left and right along the shore, scanning, cataloging, deciding something, and then she reached up with her right hand, gripped the arrow shaft just above the entry point, and yanked it clean out. The sound was brief and wet. She looked at the arrow tip, turned it once, flicked a drop of blood from it, and tossed the arrow into the lake. Then she looked directly at Abel. He was still standing in the shallows with his mouth slightly open. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. It was not quite a glare. It was more the look a person gives when they have been caught in a private moment and they are deciding whether to be annoyed about it. She was annoyed about it. "You can close your mouth," she said. Her voice was deep and even, with the faint clipped consonants that marked someone who had learned the common tongue as a second language and had long since mastered it. "It is not an impressive wound." Abel shut his mouth. He looked down at the net in his hands, then looked back at her. "It is still a wound," he said. "I have had worse." He believed her. He waded to the dock and pulled himself up onto the planking, setting his net over the rail to drip. Up close she was even taller than he had guessed, half a head above him at least, which put her near 6 feet, and he was not a short man. The scent of the lake was on both of them now, and under it the clean copper smell of recent blood. "You need that bound," he said. "I am aware of what I need." He looked at the wound. The flesh around the entry point was dark green-gray from bruising already setting in, and the blood was still seeping steadily. "There is a healer in the village," he offered. 3 streets back from the dock, house with the blue shutter. She turned and looked at the village as though seeing it for the first time. Garn's Landing was not much to look at. 40 or 50 buildings clustered on the western shore of Lake Garn, mostly fishing cottages and a few trading establishments that served the lake route north. A market square, a tavern called the Net and Anchor, a healer, a smithy, 3 docks including the one they were standing on, and the cold gray-green water of the lake stretching east to where the Garn Hills rose out of the morning mist. It was late autumn. The sky was the color of old pewter and the wind off the water had teeth. "They will not treat me," she said. "Healer Ostrup is fair enough. I have been to 3 villages this week." She said it without bitterness, just flatly, as if reporting weather conditions. "I will not try a 4th healer." Abel looked at her shoulder again. He was a fisherman, not a healer, but he had spent 22 years on water, and he had pulled a hook from his own hand more than once and seen worse on boats. He knew how to pack a wound and bind it. "I have supplies at my cottage," he said. "I can clean it and bind it if you want." She looked at him for the first time with something other than annoyance, a measuring kind of attention, slow and direct, that started at his face and moved down and back up. He was 30 years old, weathered, with salt-rough skin and the ropey, specific musculature of a man who hauled nets for a living, brown hair, a jaw that had not seen a razor in a week. He was wearing a fisherman's canvas shirt soaked to the knee, and he smelled exactly like what he was. He held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not fidget. "Why?" she asked. "Because you are bleeding." She considered this. "That is not a sufficient reason to invite a stranger into your home." "You yanked an arrow out of yourself without flinching," he said. "I am not particularly worried about what you might do to my cottage." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but something. "Vola," she said. "What?" "My name, Vola Strongtusk." She said it the way someone says a name that has gotten them into trouble before, square and unapologetic. "Abel Turner." He picked up his net. "Come on then, before you bleed on my dock." She followed him. His cottage was 2 streets back from the water, small and salt-bleached, with a low roof and a window that looked out over the rooftops toward the lake. Inside it was sparse and functional, a good fire because he had banked it before going out. A single cot, a table, 2 chairs, shelves of line and tackle, and jars of brine and cured fish stacked with the particular order of a man who lived alone and did not waste space. A chest under the window held a canvas kit with linen strips, a jar of pine tar salve, a needle and thread, and a flask of spirits strong enough to clean a wound. He pulled a chair close to the fire and set the kit on the table. Vola looked around the cottage the same way she had looked at the village, cataloging, deciding. She did not seem disturbed by the smallness of it. She crossed to the chair and sat, pulling the lace of her left shoulder guard loose with practiced fingers, sliding the leather off to expose the wound. Abel crouched beside her and looked at it properly for the first time. The arrow had gone in at a shallow angle and come out clean, no broken tip, no fragment left behind. The wound was ugly but straightforward. He wetted a strip of linen with spirits and pressed it in without preamble. Vola inhaled through her nose. That was all. "Sorry," he said. "Do not apologize for doing it correctly." He worked steadily. He was not a healer, but he was precise, and he was gentle where gentleness mattered and firm where firmness was needed. And after a few minutes the wound was clean, packed, and bound tightly with linen strips over a pad of pine tar salve. "Where did it come from?" he asked. "Highwaymen on the Northern Pass Road." She watched his hands as he worked. 4 of them. They misjudged how many of them it would take. 4. "The arrow was lucky. I was moving when it hit." She said it without pride, simply clarifying the facts. "I put 2 of them on the ground before the other 2 decided they had business elsewhere." Abel tied off the binding. "So they are still out there. They are running north, and they are not going to stop. I broke one man's knee and the other lost 2 fingers." She paused. He should have let go of the knife. Abel sat back on his heels and looked up at her. This close, the firelight was warm on the green of her skin and in her dark eyes, and he was aware in a specific and inconvenient way that she was extraordinarily striking. He was also aware that she was watching him with the same steady, measuring attention she had been using since the dock. "You are going north," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am going to Velt's Crossing." Abel knew Velt's Crossing. It was 4 days north on the Pass Road, a market town, the last large settlement before the Garn Hills gave way to the high wilderness plateau that the locals called the Teeth. "That road is going to get rough in the next few weeks," he said. "Early winter up in the hills." "I know what early winter is." "Right." He stood, put the kit away, and moved to the fire to bank it higher. "Why Velt's Crossing?" There was a pause behind him. He did not push it, just settled the coals and hung the kettle. "There is a man there who owes my clan a debt," she said at last. "A significant one. He has been not paying it for 3 years. A debt of coin, a debt of passage. He holds a document, a land charter, that grants my clan grazing rights through the high plateau. Without it, we cannot winter our herds in the Teeth. Without the herd, the clan cannot feed itself through winter." She said this with a flatness that made it sound like weather forecast, but he heard the weight underneath. "He has been sitting on the charter, claiming it is lost. It is not lost, he has it. You are going alone to get it back. I was the fastest rider available. Abel brought 2 cups to the table and poured tea, actual tea, not the bark brew most people in Garn's Landing drank, because he traded fish for it with a merchant who came through twice a year, and he liked it. He set 1 cup near her hand. She looked at it. "It is just tea," he said. "Drink it." She picked it up and drank. Something in the line of her shoulders eased slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a rope given a 1/4 inch of slack. "How long has your clan been without the charter?" he asked. 2.5 years. We have been managing, but this winter will be harder than the last 2. The herd has grown." She turned the cup in her hands. "If we cannot winter them in the teeth, we will have to slaughter 1/3 of them before the cold sets in." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind came off the lake and pressed at the window. "The pass road through the North Hills is bad right now even without the weather," he said carefully. "You know the crossing at Dunmore Bridge washed out 2 months back." She looked at him sharply. "What crossing?" "Dunmore Bridge. It goes across the gorge at the 4th mile above Orsel Ford. The autumn floods took it." He watched her face. "The only other way to Velt's Crossing is the lake route up the eastern shore of Lake Garn, over the Narrows, through the hill pass at Coldgate, and down the north slope. Longer, but the road holds." Vola set the cup down. "I came down the pass road from the north. You came in from the south end. The crossing is 6 miles north of here. You would have hit it in a day." She was quiet for a moment. He watched her reassemble her plans. "How long is the lake route?" 6 days if the weather holds, 7 if it does not." "I do not have 7 days." Abel opened his mouth, closed it, and then said the thing he had been half thinking since the dock, the thing that was probably unwise. "I know the lake route end to end. I have run supply cargo up it twice a year for 5 years. I know where the shortcuts are, and where the mud will take a horse to the knee and where it will not." He paused. "My boat will not do it. The Narrows crossing is overland. But I know a man at Orsel Ford who rents pack horses. Needed a guide, I could take you." The fire crackled. Vola looked at him with that full, direct attention. "Why would you do that?" "Because it is late in the season and the road is going to get complicated and you do not know it." He met her eyes. "And because whatever that charter means to your clan sounds like it matters." She studied him for a long moment. He did not fidget. "I cannot pay you much," she said. "I am not asking for pay." "Then what are you asking for?" He thought about it honestly. "Nothing," he said. "I have not been out of Garn's Landing in 8 months. My boat needs recalking for winter, and I am sick of looking at the lake." He almost smiled. "And someone ought to watch that shoulder." The corner of her mouth moved again. This time it was almost definitely a smile. "You are a strange man, Abel Turner." "Fisherman," he said. "We are all a bit strange." They left the next morning. Vola had spent the night at the net and anchor. Not by choice exactly, but because Abel had gone ahead and spoken to Marin, the landlady, and Marin was the kind of woman who had seen everything come off the lake and had stopped being surprised by any of it 20 years ago. She gave Vola a room without commentary and charged her the same rate as anyone else. Abel packed light: a bedroll, his oilskin, a canvas bag with 6 days of dried fish and hardtack and a wheel of hard cheese, a hatchet, a short knife, flint, and the kit. He was at the stable at the north end of the village at first light, arranging for a horse from Danner who kept the livery. Vola was already there. She had relaced her shoulder guard over the binding, checked her bow, and was standing at the stable gate with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for at least 10 minutes and had decided not to say so. Her bow was strung now, quiver on her back, the long hunting knife at her hip, and in the gray morning light she looked exactly like what she was, a warrior on a road mission, lean and purposeful and entirely capable of managing without him. He was aware, not for the first time, that he was an ordinary fisherman who had just offered to guide a woman who could have put 2 highwaymen on the ground and walked away with an arrow in her shoulder. He saddled his horse without comment, and they rode out through the sleeping village as the first light came off the lake. For the first 2 hours they did not talk much. which suited them both. The road along the eastern shore was good packed earth and gravel, wide enough for a cart, running between the lake on the left and the rising ground of the lower Garn Hills on the right. The lake was cold and flat under the gray sky, and the birch trees along the shore had gone fully yellow, dropping leaves onto the water in long drifts that moved with the wind. Abel watched the road and the hills, sorting the terrain the way he sorted the water, reading what it was telling him. The clouds had come down in the night and the air smelled like iron, which meant snow somewhere above them. Maybe 2 days away, maybe less. "How is the shoulder?" he asked. "Fine." Fine as in fine, or fine as in you are not going to tell me otherwise. A pause. "The latter," she admitted. "It is sore. It will be sore for several days. It is not impeding function. Tell me if it does." She looked at him sideways. "I will handle my own wounds, Abel Turner." "I know you will. Tell me anyway." Another pause, shorter this time. "Fine." They stopped at midday where a stream crossed the road and let the horses drink. Vola checked her own binding without being asked, peeled back the pad, looked at it, and replaced it with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this many times. The wound was not infected, the pine tar had done its work and the bleeding had stopped cleanly. Abel handed her hardtack and a strip of dried fish, and she took it without ceremony and ate standing up, watching the hill line. "You have been a fisherman your whole life?" she asked. Not particularly conversationally, but he had the sense she was choosing to be curious. "Since I was 12. Went out with old Danner, the livery man's father, not him, for 3 years as crew, then bought my first boat at 15. He broke his own hardtack and chewed. Smaller than the one I have now. Barely stayed afloat in any kind of chop." "Where are you from?" "Before Garn's Landing." "Garn's Landing." "Born there?" He looked at the lake. "My mother was a dock worker. Father was a lake trader, gone more than he was there. When I was 19 he went north on a winter run and the ice came in early." He said it simply. "That was it." Vola was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry," she said, and she sounded like she meant it precisely and without excess. "It was a long time ago." He looked at her. "You." "I grew up in the high plateau, the teeth as your people call it," a brief, dry note in her voice on that. "My mother's clan, the Strongtusk clan." She paused. "My mother led it until 4 years ago. She passed leadership to my elder brother Davin when she died." "Is that why you are doing this?" "For Davin's clan." "For my mother's clan," she corrected, gently but clearly. "Davin leads it now, but it was hers before, and it will be my niece's after when she is old enough. I do this because it is mine to do." She looked at him steadily. "Do you understand that?" He thought about it. He thought about the boat he had bought at 15 and the way he felt about the water, the specific responsibility of it, the way it was his in a way that had nothing to do with ownership. "Yes," he said. "I do." Something in her face settled. They rode on. By the second day they were well above the lakehead and into the lower hill country, and the easy road had given way to a trail that climbed and wound through stands of pine and birch. The air was colder, the ground harder, and Abel could see his breath. The clouds were lower. He found them a campsite in a bend of the Orsal stream, sheltered on 3 sides by a limestone outcrop, with a fire ring of old stones that someone had built years back and that still held. He had a fire going before Vola had finished picketing the horses, and he was pleased about that in a way he did not examine too closely. She came to the fire and crouched across from him, holding her hands to the warmth. The binding on her shoulder was holding cleanly. Her braid had loosened further over 2 days of riding and the dark hair was half undone around her shoulders, and in the firelight she looked. He made himself stop looking at that and stirred the fire instead. They ate. He had brought a small cooking pot and made a fish and dried onion broth that was simple and hot and good. Vola ate a full bowl and a half without comment, which he took as approval. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You have been not asking things since yesterday morning," she said. "Ask. The man at Velt's Crossing, the one with the charter, what is his name?" "Aldous Fenn." She said it with the specific flatness of someone saying a name they have thought about very carefully at odd hours. "He is a land agent. He handled the original registration of the charter 20 years ago when my mother negotiated it with the provincial governor. When the governor died, Fenn held the original document as custodian. A pause. He decided custodian meant owner. Is there a copy, a duplicate filed somewhere? There was. The governor's office in Velt's Crossing held one. Fenn was appointed interim administrator of the governor's estate when the governor died. The copy disappeared from the records office within a month. She looked into the fire. He covered his tracks well. But he could not cover all of them. There is a witness, a woman named Bren who worked in the records office. She saw him take the charter. She will testify to a magistrate if I can get her there. Is she still in Velt's Crossing? She is. I received a letter from her 3 months ago. She is ready to speak. Vola's jaw tightened. I need to get there before Fenn hears I am coming. He has money and he has friends. If he has time to prepare, he will discredit her. Abel turned this over. So speed matters. Speed matters very much. He looked at the sky. The clouds had come down further. He could smell the change in the air distinctly now, the sharp mineral cold that came before snow, the way the wind had dropped to almost nothing, which was not good, calm before the fall. I think we have 1 day before it snows, he said, maybe less. I know. How many days behind schedule does the reroute put you? 2. Then we push tomorrow. I know a route above the Narrows crossing that cuts a day off. It is steep and the horses will not like it, but it is passable. He looked at her. Your call. You know what the time pressure is. She met his eyes across the fire. The firelight was orange on her face, warming the green of her skin, and her dark eyes were steady and direct, and there was something in them that went beyond measuring him now, something that was deciding something different. We push, she said. All right. They were quiet for a time. The stream moved over stones in the darkness behind them, and the fire settled. You have done this before, she said eventually. Helped a stranger on a road. Not exactly like this, he said honestly. Then what makes this different? He thought about it. He could say the practical things, the road, the route, the shoulder, and all of them were true. But that was not entirely it. He looked at the fire. You yanked that arrow out and you were annoyed that I was watching, he said. Like it was a private thing I had stumbled into. She made a short sound that might have been a laugh. It was. I know, but I kept thinking about it. He paused. You were alone and you were hurt and you kept going anyway and you were annoyed about being seen doing it. Like being vulnerable was worse than the arrow. He looked at her. I just thought someone ought to be on the same road for a while. That is all. Vola was quiet for a long moment. The fire moved between them. That is a strange reason, she said. I told you, fishermen. She looked at him, and this time the corner of her mouth moved fully, a real, slow smile, small and specific, that reached her eyes. It was the first time he had seen it completely, and it landed on him like sun breaking through cloud, unexpected and warm. Get some sleep, Abel Turner, she said. We push at dawn. He lay down in his bedroll and looked at the overhang of rock above him and the cold stars where the clouds had thinned for a moment. And he was aware with great clarity that he was already in more trouble than the road. The snow came not at midday as he had hoped, but at mid-morning, not gently, but in the flat, determined way of early-season high-country snow that means business. One moment the air was sharp and still, and the next the sky had gone white and the flakes were falling dense and sideways on a wind that had found them from the north. They were halfway up the steep route above the Narrows, horses picking their way up a switchback track between limestone walls, and Abel pulled up and turned his horse to look at the sky and felt his stomach tighten. That is fast, he said. Vola pulled up beside him. She had been riding the switchbacks with the ease of someone raised in mountain terrain, her horse picking up on her calm and moving accordingly. How far to the Narrows crossing? An hour, maybe less in good conditions. He looked at the track above them. The snow was already laying on the limestone, dusting the ledges, making the rock look deceptively soft. The track is going to ice. Then we move now before it does. He nodded and they urged the horses upward. The wind was full in their faces on the exposed sections, and Abel tucked his chin into his collar and watched the track and did not look at the drop on the left side, which was steep enough to matter if a horse put a foot wrong. He heard Vola's horse breathing hard behind him, and the crunch of hooves on early salted rock. It was, in fact, exactly 40 minutes to the top of the route. He had done it once before in summer and the landmarks held, and they came out onto the broad shelf of the Narrows where the track leveled, and the gorge crossed below them on a stone bridge, old and narrow but sound. He had crossed it twice before and knew the footing. The snow was thicker up here. The far side of the gorge was already white. He crossed the bridge first, feeling the horse tense under him at the exposed drop on both sides, keeping his hands quiet on the reins. The stone was wet but not yet iced. He made it across and turned in the saddle. Vola was already halfway across, and she was looking not at the drop but straight ahead at him, her face composed against the wind, snow catching in her loose hair and on the shoulders of her leathers, and she crossed the bridge with the absolute assurance of someone who has never once in her life considered that she might not make it across. He watched her come off the bridge and felt something turn over in his chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. "Good crossing," he said. "You crossed it first," she pointed out, "to check the footing. I know the route." "You crossed it first," she said again, and this time there was something in her voice not soft exactly but warm in its directness, that made it clear she had noticed and was not going to pretend she hadn't. He looked away at the north track and felt his ears go hot, which was inconvenient in a snowstorm. "Coldgate is 4 hours," he said. "We need to move." They moved. Coldgate was not a village, just a way station, a stone building with a low roof, a stable attached, a fireplace, and a keeper named Holt who was approximately 70 years old, enormously bearded, and completely unbothered by the sight of an orc woman ducking through his doorway with snow in her hair. He had clearly seen stranger things come over the pass. He charged them 2 copper for stabling and 1 copper each for a spot by the fire and a bowl of stew, and he made the stew from dried mutton and root vegetables, and it was hot and filling, and Abel had 2 bowls. Vola had 3, and Holt refilled her bowl without being asked and without comment, which made Abel like him considerably. They sat by the fire while the storm pressed at the shutters, and Abel spread his oilskin map on the floor between them and traced the north slope route with his finger. "Coldgate to the floor of the North Valley is half a day in good conditions," he said. "Storm may push that. But once we are on the valley floor, the road is good all the way to Velt's Crossing. What is the total from here? Day and a half, maybe 2. He looked at her. "You said Fenn has not heard you are coming, not as of 2 weeks ago. Then we are still ahead of it." He looked at the map. "Provided the valley road holds." "It will hold." She was looking at the map at the line of the road, and her finger came down on Velt's Crossing as if she were pinning it. "It has to." He watched her face. The firelight was on it again, and the set of her jaw, the particular steadiness of her eyes when she looked at the map. This was what she had come north for, what she had been carrying since she left the high plateau, what she had not said in full but what he could feel in the way she held herself. A clan depending on grazing rights. A winter coming. An ordinary man sitting on a document that could mean the difference between a herd that survived and one that did not. "Tell me about the teeth," he said. She looked up. "The high plateau, what is it like?" She was quiet for a moment, as though she were deciding whether to give him the practical description or the real one. "In summer it is the finest land I have ever seen," she said at last. "The grass goes for miles, proper tall grass, not scrub. The herd moves across it and they are fat and healthy, and the mares drop good foals." She paused. "In winter it is a different thing entirely. Cold that does not let go, snow that comes shoulder deep in the worst years. The grazing grounds in the teeth, the lower plateau, the south-facing slopes, they stay open in all but the worst winters. The grass stays under the snow but accessible, and the herd can paw down to it." She turned the cup in her hands. "Without those grounds, we pen the herd on the high plateau and we run out of fodder by February. Your mother negotiated the charter herself. She spent 2 years on it, rode down to Velt's Crossing 4 times, once in winter, to get the governor to agree." Vola's voice had a particular quality now, not grief exactly but the weight of completed things. She was a remarkable woman. She would not have left a thing like that in the hands of a man like Fenn if she had known. Abel thought about his own father gone under the ice. The ways people leave you things to carry. She sounds like she was. Vola looked at him. She was more stubborn than I am, she said, which he suspected was saying quite a lot. She would have approved of this journey. Would she have approved of a human fisherman guiding you? The corner of her mouth moved. She would have said a guide is a guide and a useful one is better than a proud one. She paused. She was pragmatic. So are you. I try to be. She looked at him for a moment that stretched. You are easier to be around than I expected. He raised his eyebrows. That is not an insult. I expected wariness. Human men on the road, meeting an orc woman alone. I expected wariness or aggression or the particular look they give you when they have decided you are more animal than person. She said it matter-of-factly, without heat, the way you talk about weather patterns you have memorized. You did not give me any of those. You had an arrow in your shoulder, he said. The situation seemed to call for something more practical. Yes, she looked at him with the measuring look, but it was different now from what it had been on the dock. The calculation was gone from it. Something more straightforward had taken its place. Abel Turner, Vola Strongtusk. She smiled fully this time, both sides of her mouth, the tusks framing it, the dark eyes warm. It hit him harder than it had any right to. Get some sleep, she said. We push at dawn. The north slope in the morning was steep and cold, but the storm had blown itself out by midnight, and the sky was clean and pale blue over the snow, and they made the valley floor by midday. The road on the valley floor was packed earth under a light snow crust, and the horses moved well on it, and the miles went under them with satisfying steadiness. Abel rode beside her where the road was wide enough, and they talked more easily now than they had before. The road and the cold had burned off whatever remained of the initial strangeness between them, and he found that talking to her was less like conversation and more like the satisfaction of a good rope, taut and reliable, something you could put weight on. She told him about the herd, 340 animals. She knew the count to the individual, knew which mares had foaled last year and which were in foal now, knew the names her brother gave the lead animals. She talked about the plateau in summer with a warmth in her voice that he recognized as the specific love of landscape that got into you when you grew up somewhere, and it became part of how you thought. He told her about the lake, the way the light came off it at certain hours in autumn, the particular sound of ice forming in early winter, the way you learned to read the water for weather the same way you might read a person's face. He told her about the year he had hit a late autumn storm 3 miles out and ridden it back by feel in the dark, the waves going over the bow, and she listened with full attention, leaning slightly forward in the saddle, asking specific questions about wind direction and sail trim with the interest of someone who had never been on the water but understood the principles of it. You were not afraid, she asked. I was very afraid, he said. But fear does not steer the boat. She looked at him. No, she said, it does not. In the late afternoon of the second day on the valley road, with Velt's crossing visible in the distance as a smudge of smoke and rooftops against the hill slope, Vola pulled her horse up and Abel heard it a second later, the sound of riders coming fast from the east, 3 of them, cutting across the open ground on an intercept line. He looked at her and saw that her hand was already on her bow. Fenn's men, he asked quietly. Perhaps. She watched them come. Stay close. The 3 riders came up hard and pulled in, their horses blowing, and Abel saw at once that these were not highwaymen. They were town riders wearing the yellow and gray of a private house guard, well equipped, with a surly confidence about them that was worse in some ways than outright aggression. Vola Strongtusk, said the lead rider. He was a heavy-built man with a close beard and a crossbow across his saddle. Aldous Fenn sends his regards. He invites you to turn around. Abel felt his jaw tighten. Vola regarded the 3 men with absolute calm. I have not come to see Aldous Fenn, she said. I have come to see the magistrate. My business is with the court. The magistrate is a busy man. Then I will wait. The road into Velt's crossing is closed to your kind today, the lead rider said, and the contempt in his voice was not subtle. Fenn recommends the south road. Goes back to the lake country nice and smooth. Vola looked at them for one quiet moment. Then she looked at Abel. He held her gaze and gave one small shake of his head, not saying don't, but saying, I see them, I see the crossbow, I am thinking. He turned to the lead rider. My name is Abel Turner, he said. I am a registered cargo carrier on the lake country circuit, and this woman is traveling with me as a hired guide. We are on a legal road in open territory, and your employer has no authority over it. Tell Fenn that the road does not close for his preferences. He kept his voice level and clear. And tell him that anything that happens to us on this road will be reported to the magistrate along with the rest of it. The lead rider looked at him with the specific contempt reserved for ordinary men who said inconvenient things. Fenn will hear you are in town before you get to the gate, he said. Good, Abel said. That will save us the trouble of finding him ourselves. The three riders looked at each other. The lead man spat to the side, said nothing more, and the three of them turned and rode hard back toward the east. Abel watched them go. He felt Vola watching him. Cargo carrier on the lake circuit, she said. I did carry cargo twice a year, he said. It is not entirely a lie. You did not flinch. I wanted to. He looked at her. Are we going to have trouble at the gate? Fenn will have someone there, but the gate is public and the magistrate's court is public and Bren is waiting. She straightened in the saddle, and her face was set with the particular resolution of someone who has come very far and is nearly there. We go fast and we go straight. Are you with me? Where else would I be? He said. She looked at him, a long, direct look, and in it he saw something that had not been on the dock and had not been at the first fire and had not been at Coldgate, something warmer and more specific. Something that had been building since the bridge at the Narrows and had been quietly deciding itself for 2 days on the valley road. Come on, she said, and kicked her horse to a canter. He went after her. Velt's Crossing was a proper town, 300 buildings at least, stone walls around the market quarter, a main street wide enough for 2 wagons abreast, and the sort of layered noise that came from a place that traded in goods and judgments both. The gate was open, and the gatekeeper looked at Vola and looked at Abel and looked back at Vola and decided, correctly, that the cost of making trouble was not worth it today. They were through and moving up the main street before anyone organized an objection. Abel had been to Velt's Crossing twice on supply runs, and he knew the layout well enough. The magistrate's court was in the north quarter, a stone building with a carved lintel and a public steps. Bren, Vola had said, lived on a street 2 over from the market, a narrow lane of tradespeople's houses. Bren first, he said. You want the witness with you when you walk into the court. Vola looked at him. Agreed. They found the house, a narrow 2-story with a green door, and Vola knocked. A pause, then the door opened to show a small, older woman with sharp eyes and the careful stillness of someone who had been waiting to be found for 3 years. You are Strongtusk, the woman said. I got your letter. I am. Vola's voice was careful, precise. Are you ready? Bren looked at her, then at Abel, then back at her. I have been ready for 2 years, she said. I was waiting for someone to come. The 3 of them walked to the magistrate's court together, Abel leading the horses, Vola at his left, Bren at her right. And it was the kind of walk that felt different from the inside than it must have looked from the outside. 3 people moving with purpose through a town that had not expected them, heads turning in the market stalls, a whisper going ahead of them like a stone skipped on water. The magistrate was a gray-haired man named Ossian, known on the lake circuit as a fair if unhurried official, and he looked up from his desk with the specific expression of a man who had been told this morning that he would probably have visitors and was slightly annoyed that they had arrived on schedule. Vola laid out the case with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. The charter, Fenn's custodianship, the disappearance of the copy. Bren's account delivered in a clear, steady voice of watching Aldous Fenn walk out of the records office with a document folder 3 years ago, of being told by him the next morning that the governor's records were incomplete, of understanding what that meant only later. The clan's grazing rights. 3 years of economic pressure. The winter coming. Ossian listened. He asked questions. He made notes with a quill. Fenn arrived at the court with his 2 lawyers approximately 20 minutes into the proceeding, having clearly been told the moment Vola came through the gate. He was a thin, prosperous-looking man with the kind of face that had started life as open and pleasant, and had gradually closed as its owner made choices that required it to. He looked at Vola with the focused dislike of someone who has spent 3 years winning a slow victory and has just watched it start to come apart. He made his objections. His lawyers made their arguments. They were well prepared, and Ossian listened to those too. Then Ossian asked Bren to repeat for the record precisely what she had seen. She did. Her voice did not waver. Fenn said she was lying. He said it in the measured, reasonable tone of someone who had said it before and expected it to work. Ossian looked at Fenn. He looked at Bren. He looked at Vola, who was standing very still with her hands clasped behind her back and her face showing nothing except the kind of settled patience that comes from being absolutely certain you are right. "Produce the document," Ossian said to Fenn, "or I will issue a warrant for your premises." Fenn's lawyers conferred. There was a great deal of quiet, urgent discussion. 20 minutes later, a house servant arrived with a document folder. The charter was in it. Ossian reviewed it, compared it to the registration details Vola had brought from the clan records, and stamped it with the court seal and the date. He wrote an order of restitution that included 3 years of calculated grazing fees that Fenn owed the Strongtusk clan for unauthorized denial of access. He folded this into the folder with the charter and handed it to Vola. The whole thing had taken 3 hours. Vola held the folder for a moment, looking at it, and Abel watched her face. She did not cry. She did not shout or celebrate. She pressed her hand flat against the folder as if feeling the weight of it, and something in the line of her shoulders changed, not collapsing, but releasing, like a bow string let down after a long hold. 3 years of carrying this. Her mother's negotiation. The herd that had grown into a problem because the clan had not slaughtered the animals they should have been able to winter. She looked up and her eyes found Abel's immediately, the way eyes do when they know exactly where to look. He said nothing. He just looked back at her, and he hoped his face said what he was feeling because he did not have the words for it right then. She crossed to him in 3 steps and did something he had not expected. She put her right hand on his jaw, her thumb across his cheekbone, and held his face for 1 moment, looking at him directly. "Thank you," she said, "for the route, for the crossing, for the road. You would have gotten here," he said, "perhaps. But not today." She held his face a moment longer, and then she let go and turned to thank Bren, and Abel stood very still and breathed. They ate that night at a tavern in Velt's Crossing. A proper meal, roasted meat and good bread and something hot in a clay cup that was not tea but was warming. And Bren joined them and they talked about nothing much. About the road and the weather and the look on Fenn's face when Ossian said produce the document. And Vola laughed at that. A full, real laugh, low and clear. And Abel thought he would remember that sound for a very long time. Later, walking back from the tavern to the inn where they had taken rooms, the street was cold and quiet under a clear sky full of hard stars, and their breath made small clouds in the air. He was aware of her beside him, the height of her, the particular rhythm of her walk, the way she moved through the world like she belonged to every inch of it. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I ride for the plateau tomorrow. Davin needs to know. He needs to file a copy of the court order with the provincial registry before Fenn can make any further complications." She paused. "I should reach the clan in 4 days if I push." He nodded. "Of course." She had a job to finish and a clan waiting and a winter coming. He was a fisherman from Garn's Landing who had been a useful guide for 4 days and a half. The thought sat in him like the cold. Abel. She had stopped walking. He stopped too and turned, and she was facing him in the lamplight from the inn door, the charter folder under her arm, her loose hair dark around her face, the snow on the hills behind the town visible above the roofline. "You should come," she said. He looked at her. "To the plateau." "Yes." He opened his mouth and she kept going, quickly but not hurried. She had been thinking about this, he could tell. The lake route back to Garn's Landing takes you through bad country alone in early winter. The plateau route is safer and faster to the point where the roads diverge. She paused. And I want you to see it. The plateau, the teeth, the herd, a brief hesitation. I want you to see where I come from. He looked at her and understood that she was not talking about road safety. I want to see it, he said. She looked at him for one more moment with those direct, dark eyes, and then she nodded once and turned and went inside. And he stood alone for a moment in the cold street and looked up at the stars and felt something loosen in him that had been tight for a long time, the specific tightness of a man who had been alone so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be asked for. She wanted him to come, not as a guide, not for the road. She wanted him to see her home. He went inside. The ride to the plateau took 4 days, and they were the best 4 days Abel could remember in recent years. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing needed to. The drama was done. The charter was in the folder. The road north and east from Velt's Crossing was good, and they moved well on it, and they had time to simply be on the same road without urgency, driving every hour. They stopped each night in way stations or small villages, and each night they sat by whatever fire was available and talked in the way that had been building since Coldgate, easily, fully, neither of them rationing words anymore. He told her things he had not told anyone in years, about the particular feeling of the lake at 3 in the morning, when the stars were reflected in the flat water, about the loneliness that was different from being alone, the specific weight of having no one who particularly wondered where you were, about his father and the ice, and the way that had closed something in him that he had not fully known was closed until recently. She told him about her mother more, and more vividly, than she had on the valley road. A woman who had stood in a provincial governor's office in her full clan dress and argued land law in a language she had learned specifically for the purpose. A woman who had made her children understand that the world was large and required large effort, and that being orc in human territory meant you had to be better than required at every single thing, not from bitterness but from pride. She would have liked you, Vola said on the 3rd night looking at the fire. You think so? She liked people who did the practical thing without being asked and did not want to be praised for it. She looked at him sideways. You crossed the bridge first. He looked at the fire, warm. You keep mentioning that. It mattered, she said simply. On the 4th day the plateau opened up ahead of them and he understood what she had meant about the grass. Even in early winter, with the ground hardened and the tall grass bent and pale, there was a scale to it that made something in his chest expand. The sky went all the way around. The Garn Hills were behind them and the teeth, the south-facing slopes she had described, accessible and open, ran across the western horizon in a long, dark green line below the snowline. He could see the herd from a mile out. 340 animals, she had said, and he saw it was not an exaggeration. They moved across the pale winter grass in a dark brown mass, the steam of their breath rising in collective cloud, and the sound of them came to him on the wind, deep and patient and alive. There, Vola said beside him quietly. He looked at her. Her eyes were on the herd and the plateau and the teeth, and her face, the controlled, precise face he had learned to read over days and hundreds of miles, had opened completely. She looked like herself in a way she had not looked anywhere else, which was not wrong exactly because she had been fully herself every mile of the road, but here she was the specific self that had grown from this ground, and it was something to see. It is extraordinary, he said. She looked at him and found him already looking at her, and something happened in her face, swift and warm, and she did not look away. The clan's winter camp was a half-mile further, a circle of large hide tents with the central fire visible from the approach, and people were already coming out as they rode, and some on foot, some on horseback, the word running ahead. He saw a tall man come out of the largest tent who had Vola's coloring and her brother's obvious authority, and who stopped when he saw her and then moved quickly across the ground. Davin, she said, swinging down from her horse. He caught her in a rough, brief embrace. Orc men, Abel had heard, did not tend toward lengthy displays, and Davin clearly had Vola's economy of feeling. And then she stepped back and held up the folder. Davin looked at it. He looked at her face. He made a sound, short and low, that was the specific sound of relief that had been held back for a very long time. "It was there," he said. "It was there." Bren testified. Ossian issued the order. She handed him the folder. "You need to ride to the registry in Southkeep and file the copy. Take Ran with you, he knows the legal process." Davin opened the folder and looked at the charter, then at the court order, and for a moment he looked like he was going to say something he would normally not say, and then he composed himself and said instead, "You made good time. I had a good guide." Vola turned and looked at Abel, who had dismounted and was holding both horses and trying to be unobtrusive, which was only slightly successful given that he was a human fisherman in the middle of an orc clan camp. Davin looked at him with the full, assessing attention of a clan leader evaluating an unknown. It was not unfriendly. It was serious. "Abel Turner," Vola said. "He knew the lake route and the crossing at the Narrows. Without him, we would have hit the washed-out bridge and lost 2 days." Davin looked at Abel steadily. "You are a long way from the lake." "He is," Abel agreed. Davin studied him a moment more, then said, "You are welcome in this camp, Abel Turner. Come to the fire." He turned and went back toward the tent, already opening the folder again. Vola took her horse's reins from Abel and looked at him. "You all right?" she said quietly. "Fine," he said. "Fine as in fine, fine as in fine," he said and smiled. "Truly. This is," he looked at the camp, the fire, the teeth in the distance, the herd moving across the pale grass. "I am glad I am here." She looked at him. "So am I," she said. They stayed at the camp for 3 days while Davin prepared for the ride to Southkeep, and the business of the clan resumed around them, mending and stockpiling, and the practical work of winter preparation. Abel made himself useful in the ways he could. He was good with rope and cordage, good with animals, good at the quiet necessary work that needed doing everywhere. Nobody in the camp treated him badly. Some of them watched him with curiosity, some with reserve, but the reserve was the reserve of people who had learned to wait and see rather than trust at first sight, and he understood that and did not push against it. Vola moved through the camp with him in the evenings, introducing him to people, explaining things. She did not apologize for him or manage the situation. She just included him, naturally and directly, in the way she did everything else. On the second evening she took him up the slope to a rock shelf above the camp from which you could see the full sweep of the teeth at sunset, the south-facing slopes going amber and dark green in the last light, the herd a dark mass below. They sat on the rock side by side in the cooling air, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "When do you go back?" she said. He thought about Garn's Landing, the boat that needed recalking, the lake in winter gray and flat, the cottage with its 2 chairs. "When it is time," he said. "I do not have a fixed schedule." She was quiet for a moment. The light was fading and the first stars were showing above the teeth. "I will come back to the lake," she said. "In the spring. When Davin has filed the copy and the grazing rights are secured, I will come back down." She paused. "I come through the lake country on trade routes. I have done it for years." He turned and looked at her. She was looking at the teeth, not at him, but her hands were still in her lap and there was a tension in them that was not like her ordinary self-possession. "Vola," he said. She looked at him. "You do not need to give me a reason," he said quietly. "If you want to come, come. You do not need a trade route as an excuse." She looked at him for a long moment, and the tension in her hands eased. "You are very direct for a man who spent 2 days not asking questions," she said. "I learned it from someone," he said. She was quiet again, and then she turned toward him and she reached out and took his hand, not gently, not tentatively, but with the full, deliberate grip of someone who has decided something and is acting on it, her fingers wrapping around his, her thumb pressing against the inside of his wrist. "I want to come," she said. "Not for the trade route." He turned his hand in hers and held on. They sat there as the stars came fully out over the teeth, hands locked, shoulder to shoulder, and the cold came off the rock around them and neither of them moved. He kissed her first. He had not planned it, or he had been planning it for 2 days and had been pretending to himself that he hadn't, which was different. He turned toward her in the dark, and she was already turning toward him, and the first kiss was brief and cold from the air and warm from everything else, and she made a small sound against his mouth that undid him completely. She pulled back the half-inch necessary to look at him, her hand still in his, her eyes dark and direct and nearer than they had ever been. Finally, she said. He laughed a short, caught sound, and she made a sound that was absolutely a laugh in return, low and warm, and he pulled her back in, and this time neither of them pulled back for a while. The stars moved overhead, and the camp fire was a small orange point below them, and the herd breathed in the dark far below, and the world was very large and very quiet. He left on the 4th morning, as Davin's riding party was forming for the trek to Southkeep. Vola stood at the edge of the camp while he saddled the horse he would return to Orsel Ford, checking the cinch with the same focused attention she brought to everything. "For months," she said, "perhaps 5. I will be in the lake country by spring." "I will be on the lake," he said. "You know where to find me." She stood in front of him with the early light cold and pale around them and looked at him in the way she had been looking at him since the rock shelf, fully, without reservation, with the direct and open warmth of someone who had decided to stop being careful about what their face showed. "This is not finished," she said. "No," he agreed. "It is not." She stepped forward and kissed him once, deliberate and certain, and then stepped back. "Go then, before I change my mind about letting you leave." He went. He looked back once from the first rise, and she was still standing at the camp's edge, watching him, and he raised his hand and she raised hers. He turned his face toward the south and the long road home. The winter in Garn's Landing was a serious one. The lake iced earlier than usual, a thick gray rind that crept from the shore outward through December and had closed most of the channel by January. Abel recaulked his boat, mended his nets, took on dock repair work for extra coin, and spent the dark evenings by his fire in the cottage that was somewhat more noticeable as small and quiet than it had been before he had spent a night in it with company. He did not brood. That was not his nature, but he thought about her with the specific, clear-eyed honesty of a man who knew exactly what he was thinking about and had stopped pretending otherwise. He thought about the bridge crossing and the fire at Coldgate and the rock shelf, and the night that had followed it, and he thought about her hand in his and the way she had said finally, and he went asleep most nights with something warm in his chest that kept out some of the cold. He received, in February, a letter. It was carried by a northern courier, and the handwriting was precise and angular in the way of someone who had learned written common as a second script. It said, "The copy has been filed. Davin confirms the grazing rights are secure. The herd will winter well. The teeth were open all of January, the grass accessible below the snow line. 3 mares foaled early. The clan is well. I think about the Narrows Bridge more than is rational. VS," he wrote back, "the lake is frozen solid to the North Channel. 3 fishing boats got trapped in the ice in November and we pulled them out by hand. I have repaired most of the eastern dock. My boat is recaulked and ready for spring. I have 2 chairs in my cottage, and only 1 person has sat in the second one in the last year." He did not know if the letter reached her before she left for the South Road, but he sent it anyway. Spring in Garn's Landing came late and fast, the way it did in the lake country. 1 week of cold rain, and then suddenly the ice was gone, and the lake was open and blue-green and alive with the particular brightness of the first warm days. And the dock was crowded with fishermen preparing their boats, and the village felt like something that had been holding its breath for 4 months had finally let it go. Abel was out on the water by the first week of proper spring, running his nets in the early morning light, and he felt the pleasure of it that he always felt, the boat responsive under him, the water deep and clear, the sky enormous above. He was content. He had always been content on the water. He was hauling his net in at the dock on a bright morning in early April, knee-deep in the cold shallows the way he had been when he had first seen her, and he heard footsteps on the wooden planking, and he straightened up. Vola Strongtusk was walking toward him down the dock. She was, as he remembered, tall, precise in her movement, her warrior's leathers fitted close, and her bow at her back, and her dark hair loose around her shoulders this time rather than braided, and she was looking at him with those dark eyes from across the length of the dock, and even from 30 feet away he could see that she was not looking at the village or the water or the sky. She was looking at him. She stopped at the dock's edge. She looked at the net in his hands. "The lake is open," she said. "Has been for 3 weeks." His voice came out steady, which he was pleased about. "You made good time. I know the route now." The corner of her mouth moved. "I did not need a guide." "No," he said. "You did not." She held his gaze across the water. "I am here," she said, plainly, directly, without the architecture of excuse or reason. Just, "I am here." He let go of the net, let it hang on the rail, and waded to the dock and pulled himself up. Up close she was exactly herself, the same and more, the winter months having left no distance between them that he could feel, as if the space of the months had been an interruption rather than an ending. She was watching his face with the full attention he had come to understand as hers specifically, the way she read everything, thoroughly, without pretense. He put his hand on her jaw the way she had put her hand on his in the court after. "I am glad you are here," he said. She pressed her cheek into his palm. "Good," she said low, "because I am not leaving." He looked at her. "Is that a statement or a warning?" "Both," she said, and she kissed him, there on the dock in the full morning light with the lake behind them and the village waking up around them and his net still dripping from the rail. He kissed her back. He did not care at all about the village waking up. She stayed. Not stayed like a guest stays, but stayed like someone who has arrived at a destination. She took the room at the net and anchor for the first 2 weeks, not because either of them required it, but because the form of it suited her sense of how things ought to proceed. And she spent her days moving through the village with the particular unhurried confidence of someone establishing themselves. She spoke to Marin at the tavern, who greeted her with the same unbothered practicality she had shown in autumn. She helped Abel with the dock work without being asked, because her hands were useful, and she did not believe in standing idle. She became, within a week, a fixture in the mornings on the eastern dock, which some people in the village watched sidelong and some accepted with a shrug. The shrugs won. There was one afternoon, 3 weeks after her arrival, when 3 young men from the north end of the village decided to make their opinions known in the market square. They were loud about it, and they gathered a small crowd, which was the point, and they said what ignorant men said in the presence of something they could not categorize. Abel was at the fish stall when it started, and he turned and saw Vola standing very still in the middle of the square, holding a bread loaf, listening to the 3 young men with the expression she used when she was deciding whether something was worth her time. He was moving toward her, and then she moved first. She set the bread loaf down on the nearest stall counter with great care. She turned to face them fully. "You," she said to the loudest one, who was also the largest. "Come here." He came, because young men of that type always do when a challenge is issued clearly enough. He was bigger than Abel, broad through the shoulders, and he had the loose-limbed confidence of someone who had never been seriously hit. He got within arm's reach of her, and she took him by the collar and the belt and simply put him on the ground. Not brutally, efficiently, the way you set down something you no longer need to carry. He hit the paving stones flat on his back and lay there with his lungs emptied of air, looking at the sky with an expression of genuine discovery. The other 2 looked at each other. "Anyone else?" Vola asked. The crowd, which had been watching, made various sounds. Some of them were startled, some of them were amused. One older woman in the back began clapping, which started a small chain reaction of clapping that was slightly undignified for everyone involved. The man on the ground found his air and sat up and looked at her. "Get up," she said, not unkindly, "and go home. I will not do it again, but I will not be less thorough either." He got up. He left. The other 2 went with him. Vola picked up the bread loaf, paid for it, and walked back to Abel. He looked at her. Efficient, he said. He was not going to stop on his own. No, he agreed, he was not. She looked at him with that slight smile at the corner of her mouth. You are not going to tell me I should have just walked away. No, good. She held out the bread. Help me carry this. He took the bread. They walked home together through the square, and whatever else the village of Garn's Landing thought about the arrangement, it appeared to have made its decision. The summer came in properly warm, the lake green and deep under the long days, and Abel's fishing was the best in several years. His nets were full and his days were productive, and his cottage was no longer quiet in the evenings. Vola made the second chair her own. She learned the lake, not with the intent of a fisherman, but with the intent of someone learning a person's territory, a person's language, the way he moved through the specific geography of his life. She went out with him once on the boat, standing in the bow while he ran the nets, and she watched the water and the sky with the same quality of attention she brought to the plateau, and he watched her watching it. Is it very different from the land? She asked. The principle is the same, he said. You learn to read it. It tells you things if you pay attention. What is it telling you now? He looked at the water. That it is going to stay calm until mid-afternoon, and then the wind will pick up from the southwest. He looked at her. And that I am, at this moment, exactly where I want to be. She turned from the bow and looked at him across the boat, and the summer light was on her face and the lake water was blue around them. Abel, she said, yes. I claimed you, you know that. He looked at her steadily. I suspected. Among my people, when we say we are not leaving, it is a claiming, it is not casual. She held his gaze. I should have said it plainly. I claim you. You are mine and I am yours by my word and my presence and my intent. She said it with the formality of someone reciting something true in its original form. If you do not want that, tell me now. He held the boat into the light wind and looked at her for one long moment. This extraordinary woman standing in the bow of his small fishing boat in the middle of Lake Garn, claiming him with the same directness she applied to everything. No performance, no decoration, just the clear statement of what she wanted and who she had decided to be with. He had been alone for a long time. He had been content with the lake and the boat and the smallness of his life, and he had not known what was missing until an orc woman had walked down his dock with an arrow in her shoulder and been annoyed that he was watching. I want it, he said. I want you. I am not going anywhere. She crossed the boat to him in 2 steps, which required navigating a net, and a coil of rope with the elegance of someone who moved well in difficult terrain. And she took his face in her hands and kissed him with the same wholehearted directness she had kissed him on the dock in April. And the boat rocked in the mild chop, and the lake was enormous around them, and the sky was enormously blue. He wrapped an arm around her and kissed her back, and the nets could wait. They were married at the end of summer. There was no courthouse ceremony. Vola did not want one, and Abel was not particularly attached to one. What they wanted was what they built. An evening on the eastern dock, the dock he had worked all his life, with the lake going gold and amber in the setting sun. Marin from the net and anchor stood as witness. Davin arrived 4 days before, having ridden from the plateau, and stood at his sister's right shoulder with the gravity of a man fulfilling a responsibility he took seriously. Bren came from Velt's crossing, which surprised both of them and moved Vola in a way she did not comment on but which showed in her face. 3 of the other fishermen from the dock came, and the older woman from the market square who had started the clapping, and Holt the keeper from Coldgate, who had come down for a supply run and was extending his stay, which seemed unlikely until you thought about it. Davin performed the orc portion of the ceremony. He spoke in the orc tongue first, the old formal phrases that Abel did not understand word by word but which he understood in their shape, the gravity of them, the weight, the way Vola stood receiving them with her chin up and her eyes bright. Then Davin repeated it in common, because that was how things were done in a ceremony that belonged to both of them. By clan blood and clan word, Davin said, I witness my sister's claiming. She gives her word which does not break. She gives her loyalty which does not shift. She gives her name and her presence. She is his and he is hers until she says otherwise. He looked at Abel with the full, serious attention he had given him that first morning at the camp. "And you, Abel Turner?" "I am hers," Abel said, "as long as she will have me." Davin studied him for one moment more and then, clearly, decided. He put his hand out and Abel shook it, and Davin's grip was strong and certain, and he held on for a moment past the handshake in the way that meant something. Vola stood beside Abel in the long gold light off the lake, in her warrior's leathers and with her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes warm and direct. And she turned and kissed him on the dock in front of all of them without particular ceremony. And Marin cheered and the fishermen cheered and Holt raised his cup and Bren smiled into hers. The lake was gold and the sky above it was going purple at the edges, and the evening was warm and the dock was solid under their feet. And Abel Turner stood at the center of it all with his wife's hand in his and felt, with great clarity and no exaggeration at all, that he was the luckiest man who had ever hauled a net on Lake Garn. Vola Strongtusk looked at him, his weathered face, his honest eyes, the man who had crossed the bridge first and bound her shoulder and carried hardtack for 2 days on a cold mountain road for no reason other than that it was the right thing to do. And she thought about her mother, who had been pragmatic about useful people, and she thought that in this case pragmatism and love had found the same answer. She held his hand. She did not plan to let go. The lake went dark behind them, and the first stars came out over the water, and the party moved off the dock and into the warm light of the net and anchor, and the door closed behind them all.